The morning mist hung thick over the Montana woods when Duke started barking. Not his usual alert bark at a deer crossing the path, but something raw, urgent. Wyatt McAllister gripped his coffee mug tighter, watching his German Shepherd pace frantically around the massive oak, marking the edge of his land. Duke had never behaved this way. In 8 years together, the dog had faced down bears without flinching. Now he whimpered, his hackles raised, backing away from the tree, as if it harbored something evil. Wyatt approached slowly, his instincts as a retired detective prickling. The oak displayed an unnatural bulge 6 feet up, roughly the size of a grown man. Dark sap wept from cracks in the bark, releasing a smell that churned his stomach. Not the clean scent of pine resin, but something organic and wrong. Duke's amber eyes locked onto his pleading warning. Wyatt reached for his old police knife, aware that some secrets the earth keeps for decades. Wyatt McAllister had built his life around routine. At 58, the former Cedar Falls detective rose each morning at 6, brewed coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and walked the perimeter of his 10-acre property with Duke at his side. The ritual had kept him sane through the darkest years of his life. Cedar Falls, Montana, population 3. 200 was the kind of town where everyone knew your business before you did. Wyatt had served the community for 30 years, earning respect as a detective who never let a case go cold. But that was before. Before Claire McAllister lost her battle with cancer 6 years ago. Before Ava McAllister died in that twisted highway wreck 15 years back. Just 16 and full of dreams. Duke had been Ava's dying wish. Get a dog daddy. She had whispered from her hospital bed machines beeping around her like electronic mourners. Dogs don't leave you. Wyatt had found Duke at the county shelter 3 months later, a German Shepherd puppy, with amber eyes full of intelligence, seeming to understand grief. The cabin sat 5 miles outside town, surrounded by towering pines and ancient oaks. Wyatt had built it himself after Claire's funeral, seeking distance from sympathetic looks and whispered conversations that followed him through Cedar Falls streets. Out here, only Duke witnessed his bad days when the bottle called louder than reason. When the silence pressed in, he could barely breathe. Duke wasn't just a pet. He was family. The dog possessed an intelligence that unsettled some visitors, though Wyatt had grown accustomed to feeling understood by his 4-legged companion. Duke knew when nightmares would come padding silently to Wyatt's bedside in the dark hours before dawn. He sensed anniversaries, too, staying closer than usual, as if knowing his master needed comfort. The German Shepherd had never shown fear. Not when black bears wandered through the yard, not during thunderstorms that shook the cabin's foundation, not even when the occasional drunk stumbled onto the property looking for trouble. Duke faced everything with calm courage, positioning himself between Wyatt and any threat until that morning when his behavior was deeply unsettling. The ancient oak had stood sentinel at the property line for over a century, its massive trunk scarred by lightning and weather, but enduring. Wyatt had passed it thousands of times without incident, but something had changed. The unnatural bulge suggested they had stumbled upon something that had been waiting patiently in darkness, ready to surface after years of concealment. Wyatt approached the oak with the methodical caution that had kept him alive through 3 decades of police work. Duke retreated a safe distance, ears flat, every muscle tense. The dog's distress was so profound that Wyatt felt his heart spike in response. The bulge in the trunk rose roughly 5 feet and stretched 3 feet wide, forcing the bark into deep fissures. Dark resin oozed from the cracks, but it did not smell like normal tree sap. It carried an organic odor that reminded Wyatt uncomfortably of cases he had seen early in his career. He pulled the folding knife from his pocket, a tool he had carried since his first day as a patrol officer 35 years ago. The blade was still sharp, maintained with the meticulous care that had defined his career. Wyatt positioned himself carefully, aware that Duke's agitation meant they were not alone in these woods. The first incision revealed something that made Duke whimper and step back even further. Wyatt had learned long ago to trust his partner's instincts, whether that partner walked on 2 legs or 4. He paused, scanning the tree line, then pressed deeper. An old fabric emerged from the cut, darkened with age and moisture, but clearly recognizable as clothing. Wyatt's blood ran cold as he realized what he was looking at. Someone had been sealed inside this tree, the wood having grown around them over the years, creating a natural tomb. Hands shaking, Wyatt widened the opening. More cloth became visible, along with something metallic that caught the morning light. With growing horror, he recognized the shape and gleam of a badge, a police badge. Wyatt stepped back, breath coming in short gasps. In all his years on the force, he had seen death, but this discovery hit him with a force he had never felt before. Someone had been murdered and hidden here maybe years ago, and the killer had relied on the tree's growth to hide the crime forever. Duke's barking escalated, now directed not at the tree, but toward the dark forest beyond. Wyatt McAllister spun around his hand, instinctively reaching for the service weapon he no longer carried. Through the underbrush, he caught a shadow moving. Someone was out there watching. The metallic object in the tree wasn't just any badge. Wyatt forced his eyes closer, every instinct screaming at him to run, and he made out the familiar shield of the Cedar Falls Police Department. Numbers were partially obscured, but enough could be seen to send ice through his veins. Badge number 247. Detective Jake Raleigh. Wyatt sank onto a fallen log, the knife slipping from his trembling fingers. Jake had been his partner for 8 years, his closest friend, the brother he never had. 15 years ago, Jake vanished during a routine investigation. Weeks of searching turned up nothing. The FBI had been called, yet no trace of Jake Raleigh was ever found. The official line, an accident in the wilderness, maybe a fall into a ravine, maybe lost in Montana's endless forests. His body was assumed somewhere out there in millions of acres of wild country around Cedar Falls. Eventually, the search was called off. Ellie Raleigh had waited 5 years to have him declared legally dead, but Jake hadn't died by accident. He had been murdered, and someone had meticulously ensured his body would never be discovered. The tree had been younger 15 years ago, small enough that someone could hollow a space place Jake inside and let the growth seal the evidence naturally. Wyatt forced himself to stand, ignoring Duke's protests. He pulled a small flashlight from his pocket and shined it into the cavity his cuts had opened. Inside Jake's service weapon lay beside what looked like a notebook or journal. The killer had turned the tree into a macabre time capsule for Jake's final resting place. Then came the sound of tires crunching the dirt road. Wyatt and Duke froze. A patrol car was approaching his cabin, moving deliberately slowly. Wyatt quickly grabbed what he could, stuffing Jake's badge and notebook into his jacket pockets. Whoever was coming could not see what he had uncovered, not yet. Duke positioned himself by Wyatt's side as the vehicle appeared through the trees. The dog's protective instincts flared, placing himself between his master and any potential threat. Wyatt recognized the vehicle as belonging to the Cedar Falls Sheriff's Department, though he couldn't yet tell who was driving. As the car stopped near the cabin, the weight of Jake's badge burned in Wyatt's pocket. His best friend's murder had been buried for 15 years, and now someone was coming to check on him just minutes after he made the discovery. The timing was far too precise to be a coincidence. Someone knew he had found Jake Rawley's body. Someone had been watching. And that someone was about to step out of an official vehicle badge, possibly hiding a killer's heart. Deputy Carol Pike emerged with the measured poise of someone who had spent over a decade in law enforcement. Wyatt recognized her instantly. She had joined the Cedar Falls force 5 years ago, transferring from Billings with commendations in narcotics work. Competent, thorough, she had always treated Wyatt with respect, due a veteran detective even after his retirement. But today, something felt different. Duke's hackles stayed raised as she approached, amber eyes tracking every movement, sending a chill down Wyatt's spine. The German Shepherd had always been friendly with Carol Pike during previous welfare visits. Now the dog positioned himself protectively between his master and the deputy, a low growl rumbling in his chest. "Morning, Wyatt." Carol Pike called her hand, resting casually on her duty belt. "Got a call about some disturbance out here. Neighbor said it sounded like gunfire about an hour ago." Wyatt felt Jake's badge searing against his ribs where he had tucked it inside his jacket. There were no neighbors within 3 miles, and she knew it. She was probing, testing, fishing for a hint of what he might have discovered. "No gunfire here." "Carol." Wyatt replied, his voice steady despite the adrenaline. "Duke and I were just on our morning walk. You know how sound carries in these woods? Probably a hunter further up the ridge," she said, scanning the area around the oak, eyes lingering on the disturbed earth. "Mind if I take a look around protocol, you understand? Have to file a complete report." Duke's growl deepened, and Wyatt felt a chill unrelated to the morning air. In all the years he had known her, she had never been this formal. They had shared coffee on his porch, talked, laughed about department politics. Now, stepping casually away from the tree, Wyatt said, "Though I'm not sure what you expect to find. Duke is probably just chasing a squirrel or something. You know how dogs get excited," Carol Pike said. As she moved toward the oak, Wyatt McAllister noticed her right hand lingering near her sidearm. The detail triggered his old detective instincts. He catalogued every movement with the automatic precision honed over decades. Carol's patrol car blocked the main access road, her radio turned down low, unusual for someone on an active call. Most telling she hadn't checked in about her arrival. Standard procedure for a welfare check. Duke refused to leave Wyatt's side, despite her attempts to coax him with her usual friendly tone. The dog's protective stance was absolute instincts overriding any previous socialization with the deputy. "Duke seems a bit tense today," Carol Pike observed, crouching near the oak's base. "Everything okay with him?" Wyatt asked, watching as she examined the ground. "He gets spooked by things we can't always sense. Probably an old animal carcass somewhere nearby." Carol stood brushing dirt from her knees. Then Wyatt caught a glimpse of something that made his blood run cold. Tucked into her duty belt just beneath her jacket was a small digital recorder. She was documenting their conversation, treating him not as a fellow officer, but as a subject under investigation. "Wyatt, I need to ask you something," Carol said, her tone now deliberate, careful, like an interrogation. "Have you been feeling okay lately? Folks in town have been worried. Living out here alone, losing Claire and Ava the way you did, it's a lot for anyone to handle." The question was a subtle attack, meant to undermine his credibility and paint him as an unstable retiree. Wyatt recognized the tactic. He'd used it himself countless times during interrogations. Carol was laying groundwork, building a case for something bigger. "I'm fine, Carol. Duke keeps me company and I stay busy with projects around the property. Is there something specific you're concerned about?" Her hand inched closer to her weapon as she spoke. "We've had reports of someone digging around old crime scenes, disturbing evidence. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you? The question was a trap meant to gauge whether Wyatt would reveal what he had found. But it also confirmed something crucial Carol Pike knew about Jake Raleigh's body in the tree. She might not have known he had discovered it yet, but she was aware of its existence. That meant she was either involved in the murder or working for someone who was. Duke stiffened suddenly, his attention snapping to the forest behind Carol's patrol car. Wyatt followed the dog's gaze and glimpsed movement in the undergrowth. They weren't alone. Backup was hidden in the trees, watching, waiting. You know, Carol, Wyatt said carefully, I think I'll make some fresh coffee. Why don't you come up to the cabin and we can talk more comfortably? It's getting cold out here. Carol hesitated, torn between maintaining her cover and accepting what seemed like a friendly invitation. Wyatt suspected she wanted to see inside the cabin to gauge what evidence he had collected and whether he had contacted anyone about his discovery. Sounds good, she finally agreed. I could use some coffee. As they walked toward the cabin, Duke stayed vigilant, never allowing Carol behind Wyatt. The German Shepherd's instincts screamed danger, and Wyatt trusted them completely. Whatever was unfolding, Carol Pike was at the center of it, and Jake Raleigh's 15-year-old murder was about to claim another victim unless Wyatt figured out who he could trust and how to survive the next few hours. The weight of Jake's badge pressed against his ribs like a promise demanding fulfillment. His best friend deserved justice, and Wyatt would see it delivered, even if it cost him everything. Inside the cabin, Wyatt moved with deliberate calm, his mind racing. He needed to buy time, gather information, and most importantly find a way to contact help without tipping Carol off. Duke positioned himself near the kitchen doorway, eyes never leaving the deputy as she surveyed the cabin with the practiced gaze of someone used to surveillance. Nice place, Carol commented, fingers brushing along the mantelpiece where Wyatt kept photos of Claire and Ava. Must get lonely out here. When's the last time you had visitors? The question was another probe meant to see if Wyatt had shared his discovery. He measured coffee into the pot, the familiar motions steadying his nerves. Not many people make the drive out here. Fine by me. Carol picked up a framed photo of Ava at 16, taken weeks before the accident. She was beautiful. I heard she wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved animals, Wyatt replied, watching Duke's reaction. The German Shepherd remained tense protective instincts overriding years of socialization. Dogs, Wyatt knew, could sense things humans missed. Duke was telling him something vital about Carol Pike, and he had to pay attention. That's probably where you got the idea for Duke. Carol continued, setting down the photo. Ava would have loved him. Wyatt McAllister poured 2 cups of coffee, hands steady, despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. She actually suggested I get a dog he thought said it would be good company. Carol Pike accepted the cup, but didn't drink, using it instead to warm her hands. Smart girl, Wyatt muttered under his breath. Dogs are loyal, they don't betray trust like people do. The edge in his voice made Carol glance up sharply. Her gaze was sharp, scrutinizing with nothing casual about it. She was evaluating him, testing his reactions, measuring how much he knew and how dangerous he might be. Speaking of loyalty, Carol Pike said, settling into the chair across from Wyatt's kitchen table. I've been thinking about Jake Raleigh lately. You two were close, weren't you? Wyatt felt Jake's badge pressing against his ribs like a burning coal. Jake had been a good partner, a true friend. His disappearance had rocked the whole department. 15 years is a long time, Carol mused, peering over her coffee cup. Some people wonder what really happened if he just walked away, started over somewhere else. Jake would never abandon Ellie and the kids, Wyatt said firmly. Whatever happened, it wasn't voluntary. Carol's thin, calculating smile didn't waver. How can you be so sure people change? Maybe he got tired of the job, tired of the responsibility. Maybe he found something more appealing than small-town police work. Her insinuation hung in the air. Carol Pike was implying Jake had been corrupt, suggesting his disappearance tied to criminal activity. Wyatt recognized the tactic, a deliberate smear to deflect attention from the truth. Jake was as honest as they come, he said quietly. If someone claims otherwise, he added, they're either lying or misinformed. Carol set her coffee down with a sharp click against the saucer. That's only dangerous, Wyatt. Sometimes it blinds us to uncomfortable truths. Suddenly, Duke rose low growl rumbling in his chest as he stared out the kitchen window. Wyatt followed the dog's gaze and saw movement along the tree line. Dark shapes were creeping around the cabin, closing off escape routes. Carol had indeed brought backup, moving into position for whatever came next. Expecting company, she asked, noting Wyatt's focus. Just Duke being Duke. Wyatt replied, hand instinctively moving toward the drawer where his old service weapon was stored. He got nervous around strangers. Carol's hand hovered near her sidearm. Strangers? I don't see any strangers, she said, but the pretense was cracking. Wyatt could see the time for subtlety had passed. She knew he had discovered something at the oak tree, and she was here to ensure he couldn't share it with anyone else. You know, Wyatt? Carol Pike said, rising from her chair, I think we need a more honest conversation about what you found this morning, about what you think you know. Wyatt remained seated, projecting calm while calculating distances and angles. His old service weapon was 3 feet away in the drawer. Carol's gun was already within reach. Duke positioned himself between them, ready to act if his master was threatened. I'm not sure what you mean, Wyatt said carefully. Carol pulled out her phone, showing a photo. It captured Wyatt at the oak tree, cutting into the bark. Someone had been watching, documenting his discovery. We've been monitoring this location for weeks, Carol admitted. Ever since intelligence came in that someone might be snooping around old cases asking questions, disturbing things that should stay buried. A chill ran down Wyatt's spine. How long have you known about Jake? Long enough to understand some secrets are worth protecting, she said. Jake Raleigh was getting too close to things that could destroy this community. People he was investigating. People who worked hard to build something good here. Good. Wyatt's voice rose despite his effort to remain calm. Jake was murdered. My best friend was killed and stuffed in a tree like garbage. You can't stand resting your weapon now pretending this is a friendly visit. Jake was going to expose operations funding this department, money flowing into Cedar Falls. He was going to ruin lives and careers over a misguided sense of justice. Justice isn't misguided, Wyatt said slowly, rising from his chair. It's what separates us from animals. Duke tensed, sensing the danger escalating. The GermanShepherd's training kicked in, positioning him to shield Wyatt while keeping alert for threats from all sides. Animals are honest about what they are, Carol replied. They don't pretend, Wyatt countered. Jake pretended to be a crusader, but he was naive, dangerously naive. Wyatt reached a moment of decision. He could pretend ignorance, hope she would leave, but Duke's behavior made it clear they were surrounded, and this conversation was the prelude to something far worse. Carol Pike hadn't come to investigate a disturbance. She had come to clean up a problem. Who killed him? Wyatt McAllister asked directly. Who put Jake Raleigh in that tree? Carol Pike's smile was cold. Someone who understood that the greater good sometimes requires hard choices, she said. Someone who knew one man's life was a small price to pay to protect an entire community. The admission hung in the air like a challenge. Carol had essentially confessed knowledge of Jake's murder, if not direct involvement. Wyatt felt 15 years of grief and guilt settle on his shoulders. He had failed his partner, failed his friend, and now he had a chance to make it right. Jake had evidence. Wyatt said, "Marstukam notes recordings, proof of corruption. That's why he had to die. Evidence that could have destroyed good people." Carol's unconventional methods to fund essential services. Jake couldn't see the bigger picture. Wyatt understood now. Jake had uncovered a drug operation shielded by local law enforcement with profits possibly funneled back into department resources or personal accounts. When he threatened to expose it, he was eliminated to protect the conspiracy. "Where's the evidence now?" Wyatt asked. Carol's smile widened. "Safe, secure, where it can't hurt anyone else." Footsteps on the cabin porch announced her backup's arrival. Duke's hackles rose as he sensed multiple people approaching from different directions. Wyatt realized with growing dread that he and Duke were trapped, surrounded by corrupt officers who had already killed once to protect their secrets. "You don't have to do this," Wyatt said. "Whatever Jake found, whatever happened 15 years ago, it doesn't have to happen again." Carol drew her weapon, aiming steadily at Wyatt's chest. "Actually, it does. You found Jake, and now you know too much. Just like he did." Duke stepped forward, placing himself directly between the gun and his master. The German Shepherd's courage in the face of mortal danger reminded Wyatt of everything he had learned about loyalty sacrifice and doing what was right no matter the cost. The cabin door opened, and 2 more figures stepped inside. Wyatt recognized Tom Boone, and to his shock, Bob Carson himself. A respected 20-year veteran, Wyatt had considered Bob a mentor and friend. "Hello, Wyatt," Bob said quietly, a sadness in his tone. "I wish it hadn't come to this." He closed the cabin door behind him with the deliberate care of a man who had rehearsed this moment countless times. His weathered face carried 20 years of authority, but his eyes revealed a cold calculation Wyatt had never seen before, a predator cornering its prey. "You've always been too thorough for your own good," Bob Carson said, removing his hat and setting it on Wyatt's kitchen counter. "Even in retirement, you can't stop being a detective." The world shifted beneath Wyatt's feet. Bob had guided him through early years on the force stood beside him at Claire McAllister's funeral, comforted him through the darkest days after Ava's death. The betrayal cut deeper than any wound. Bob Wyatt said, voice barely a whisper, "Tell me you weren't involved in Jake's death." Bob Carson sighed heavily, the sound of a man carrying burdens he'd never wanted. "Jake was my friend too, Wyatt. You think I wanted him dead? You think any of us did?" Duke stayed between Wyatt and the 3 officers. Hackles raised a low growl rolling from his chest. The dog's protective instincts were maxed, sensing the mortal danger. "But you killed him anyway," Wyatt stated, pieces falling into place with horrible clarity. "We tried to reason with him, Tom," Boone interjected defensively. "We explained how things worked, how the money we were protecting funded equipment training community programs. Jake wouldn't listen." Bob raised a hand, silencing Boone. "Jake discovered our arrangement with certain elements of the community. Money changing hands. Yes, but not for personal gain. Every dollar went back into Cedar Falls," Bob said. "Drug money," Wyatt said flatly. "You were protecting drug dealers." "We were managing an inevitable problem," Bob Carson corrected. "Drugs were going to flow through this area no matter what we did. At least our arrangement kept it controlled, predictable, and profitable for the community." Carol Pike shifted weapons still trained on Wyatt. The money center renovations, the Christmas toy drive for underprivileged kids. Jake was going to destroy all that for some abstract principle. Wyatt stared at Bob in disbelief. "You're justifying murder by talking about Christmas toys. I'm explaining reality," Bob replied calmly. "Federal funding was cut, state budgets shrinking. We found a way to supplement resources without raising taxes or cutting services. Jake wanted to throw it all away. Jake wanted to uphold his oath, Wyatt said, voice rising. To protect and serve, not profit from crime. Bob Carson's expression hardened. And where did his oath get him dead at 34, leaving a widow and 2 young children? Sometimes idealism is a luxury we can't afford. Duke tensed, suddenly shifting his gaze toward the cabin's rear window. Wyatt McAllister followed the dog's stare and saw more figures moving through the forest. Bob Carson hadn't just brought backup. He'd brought an army. The cabin was completely surrounded. "How many officers are involved in this?" Wyatt demanded. "Enough," Bob Carson said simply. "People who understand the world isn't black and white, that sometimes good people have to make hard choices." Wyatt thought about the men and women he'd worked alongside for 30 years, wondering how many had been compromised, how many had traded principle for convenience. The corruption ran deeper than he had imagined, poisoning the very institution he had devoted his life to. Jake had evidence. Wyatt said, "Photos, recordings, documentation of your arrangement. That's why he had to die." Carol Pike smiled coldly. Jake was thorough. Too thorough. He spent months building his case. Thought he'd be a hero. "What happened to the evidence?" Wyatt pressed. "Destroyed," Bob Carson said. "Most of it, anyway. We kept some items for insurance in case anyone else got curious about Jake's disappearance." Wyatt felt horror rising as Bob admitted murder with casual indifference. The man who had taught him justice and integrity was a calculating killer, eliminating his own detective to protect a criminal conspiracy. "The tree," Wyatt said. "That was my idea," Bob admitted slowly. "Jake loved these woods. He hunted up here when we were younger. Seemed fitting he should rest somewhere he found peace. You stuffed him inside a living tree like garbage. We gave him a burial that would last forever," Bob corrected. "The tree became his monument, growing stronger each year, keeping the secret safe." Duke's growl intensified as Bob stepped closer. The German Shepherd's loyalty was absolute. He would die protecting his master, and everyone in the room knew it. "The question now," Bob continued, "is what we do about you. You've discovered something meant to stay hidden. Knowledge that could destroy careers, lives, everything we've built." "I won't cover this up," Wyatt said firmly. "Jake deserves justice. His family deserves the truth." Carol Pike laughed bitterly. "Justice. Truth. Do you know what the truth would do to this community? Half the city council would be implicated. The mayor, the district attorney, business leaders who facilitated our arrangement, the whole power structure of Cedar Falls would collapse." "Maybe it should," Wyatt replied. "Maybe starting over would be better than living with this corruption." Bob Carson shook his head sadly. "You've always been naive, Wyatt, just like Jake. You see the world in absolutes, good versus evil, right versus wrong. Reality is more complicated." "Murder isn't complicated," Wyatt said. "It's wrong, period. Jake's death was regrettable but necessary," Bob stated coldly. "He was going to destroy everything we worked to build. His idealism would have cost hundreds their jobs, their livelihoods, their future." Wyatt looked around the cabin that had been his sanctuary, surrounded by men he once trusted with his life. The weight of Jake's badge pressed against his ribs, a reminder of promises broken and justice denied. "You're going to kill me too," Wyatt said. It wasn't a question. Bob's expression remained neutral. "We're going to ensure Jake's secret remains safe, that the community we've protected continues to thrive. Your death will be tragic but understandable. A retired cop depressed over the loss of his family takes his life in isolation out here. People will ask questions. I have friends in the department, contacts other agencies," Carol Pike added. "You've isolated yourself, shown signs of depression and instability. Your suicide will be sad, but not surprising." Wyatt realized they had planned this long ago, studying his habits, building a narrative to cover murder without raising suspicion. They had weaponized his grief. His isolation was cover for execution. Duke barked sharply. His attention focused outside. Wyatt heard a vehicle approaching on the access road. Bob Carson frowned, clearly unprepared for arrivals. "Check that Bob ordered Tom Boone." As Boone moved toward the window, Wyatt saw his chance. The momentary distraction shifted the tactical balance. Duke sensed the change in tension, ready to act on his master's signal. Wyatt looked down at his faithful companion, the German Shepherd, who had been Ava's final gift, who had comforted him through the darkest years. Duke's amber eyes met his, reflecting absolute trust, unwavering loyalty, and a willingness to sacrifice everything for the bond they shared. "I'm sorry, boy." "Wyatt," McAllister whispered, knowing whatever happened next could cost them everything they'd found in each other. The approaching vehicle grew louder, and Bob Carson's carefully orchestrated plan began to unravel. Someone was coming who wasn't part of the conspiracy, someone who might witness the events about to unfold inside the cabin. Bob Carson's expression darkened as he realized his timeline had been compromised. "We need to move this along," he said, raising his weapon. The rumble of an old Ford pickup grew louder. Wyatt's heart sank. He recognized who was driving the widow of Jake Raleigh, Ellie Raleigh, making her monthly drive on the anniversary of her husband's disappearance, bringing flowers to the spot where his patrol car was last seen. Bob Carson cursed under his breath, realizing his carefully planned execution could be disrupted by this unexpected witness. "Boone, get out there and turn her away. Tell her the road's closed for maintenance." But it was too late. Ellie's truck crested the hill, coming into view of multiple police vehicles around Wyatt's cabin. She would see the activity, understand something significant was happening at the place where she came to mourn her husband. Duke barked, hackles raised, sensing the escalating tension. He positioned himself directly between Wyatt and Bob Carson, teeth bared in a display of protective fury. Every instinct screamed danger. "Change of plans," Bob Carson said grimly, keeping his gun trained on Wyatt. "We'll have to stage this differently. A confrontation with an unstable tragedy." Wyatt felt ice run through his veins as he realized Bob's new plan. The chief intended to kill them both, Wyatt and Ellie, and frame it as some unknown threat tied to Jake's old case. It would be messy, but Bob had the resources to control the narrative. "She's innocent," Wyatt said desperately. "Ellie has nothing to do with this. Let her go. She's been asking questions for 15 years, Carol Pike replied coldly. "She never accepted that Jake simply disappeared. She's a problem waiting to explode." Through the window, Wyatt saw Ellie's truck pulling to a stop near the patrol cars. She was stepping out, movement showing the confusion of someone encountering the unexpected. Small in her early 50s, still attractive, despite grief lined on her face, she had never remarried, never given up hope of learning the truth. Jake loved her, Wyatt muttered, buying time as his mind raced. He talked about her constantly, their plans, their dreams. Jake should have thought about that before trying to be a hero, Bob Carson replied without emotion. "Some people are more important than ideals. Some lives matter more than principles," he added. Duke lunged forward, not at Bob, but toward the kitchen drawer where Wyatt kept his old service weapon. The German Shepherd's intelligence was remarkable. He understood the tactical situation and was trying to help his master access the tools to fight back. Carol Pike swung her weapon toward Duke, but Wyatt moved faster than he had in years. Adrenaline surged through him, giving him speed and strength he'd forgotten. He dove for the drawer fingers, closing around the familiar grip of his Glock 40, just as gunfire erupted inside the cabin. The first shot came from Carol's weapon aimed at Duke, but Wyatt's sudden movement threw off her aim. The bullet splintered wooden cabinets, debris flying across the kitchen. Duke yelped, but continued moving with speed and agility, avoiding follow-up shots. Wyatt rolled behind the kitchen island service weapon, finally in hand, after months of peaceful retirement. Muscle memory flooded back. 30 years of training overrode fear and doubt. He was a cop again, fighting for his life and the lives of the innocent. Bob Carson fired twice bullets, punching through the island's surface, missing Wyatt by inches. "You're only making this harder on yourself and on Ellie. She's going to die because of your stubborn pride," Bob shouted. Outside, Wyatt heard Ellie Raleigh screaming. She'd heard gunfire calling for help, her voice carrying across the Montana wilderness like a beacon of hope. Duke moved like a ghost, using furniture and shadows to avoid the officer's shots. His protective instincts had evolved into something primal, fierce. He wasn't just defending his master, he was fighting for family, for the bond that had sustained them both through years of grief and isolation. "Give up!" "Wyatt," Bob Carson called out. "You're outnumbered and outgunned. We can make this quick and painless or let it drag out, your choice." Wyatt McAllister thought of Ava, of the promise he'd made to honor her dying wish for a companion dog. Duke had been both protector and friend, giving him a reason to keep living when grief threatened to drown him. "Jake trusted you," Wyatt shouted at Bob Carson, trying to keep the chief talking while he plotted his next move. "He looked up to you, respected you. How could you betray him like that?" "Jake forced my hand," Bob replied, voice carrying a weight of regret. "I gave him every chance to walk away, to accept how things worked. He chose ideology over pragmatism." Carol Pike moved to flank Wyatt, using overturned furniture for cover, her reflection catching in the shadows. Suddenly, Duke appeared behind her, moving with the silent grace of his wolf ancestors. The German Shepherd launched at the deputy, 80 pounds of muscle and fury driven by absolute loyalty. Carol spun, but Duke was inside her guard, powerful jaws clamping down on her gun arm. She screamed as her weapon flew across the cabin floor. Duke's attack created the opening Wyatt needed. He rose from cover, service weapon steady, two-handed grip, front sight, locked on Bob Carson's chest. "Drop your weapon!" Wyatt commanded, voice carrying 3 decades of authority. "It's over, Bob." Williams hesitated, gun wavering between Wyatt and Duke, his face calculating a way to salvage his plan. That hesitation cost him everything. Tom Boone, panicking amid the chaos, made the fatal mistake of firing at Duke while the dog was still engaged with Carol Pike. The bullet struck Carol in the shoulder, spinning her into Duke's path. The cabin erupted in violence. Duke, confused by Carol's fall and the scent of blood, redirected his protective fury toward the nearest threat. Boone screamed as the dog's training took over jaws, seeking to neutralize danger to his pack. In the chaos, Bob Carson made his final move, swinging his weapon at Wyatt with deadly intent. Duke abandoned his current target, throwing himself between Bob and Wyatt just as the chief's finger tightened on the trigger. The gunshot thundered through the cabin. Duke's body jerked as the bullet found its mark, momentum carrying him into Wyatt's arms, 80 pounds of loyal heart collapsing against his chest. Blood seeped through Duke's thick coat, staining Wyatt's shirt. "No, Duke," Wyatt whispered, holding him as his legs gave out. The German Shepherd's amber eyes found Wyatt's face still alert despite the grievous wound. His tail wagged weakly, signaling he had done his job, protected his pack, and that was enough. That was. Bob Carson stood frozen, weapon still smoking, pointed at the spot where Duke had intercepted the bullet meant for Wyatt. For a moment, the cabin was silent, except for Duke's labored breathing and the distant sound of Ellie Raleigh's screams outside. You killed him, Wyatt said, voice breaking, pressing hands against the dog's wound, feeling the warm blood flow between his fingers. You killed the best of us. Bob Carson's face showed something Wyatt had never seen before: genuine remorse. The chief lowered his weapon slightly, staring at Duke, with the expression of a man who had finally crossed a line he couldn't uncross. I didn't mean, Bob started, then stopped. The dog shouldn't have interfered. Duke's breathing grew labored, each inhale a struggle, sending waves of pain through Wyatt's heart. The German Shepherd who had saved him from despair after losing Claire and Ava was dying in his arms. Another casualty of the corruption that had already claimed Jake Raleigh. Carol Pike groaned on the floor, clutching her wounded shoulder. Tom Boone lay motionless near the overturned kitchen table, either unconscious or neutralized by Duke's attack. The cabin, once Wyatt's sanctuary, was now a battlefield littered with the cost of seeking justice. Look what you've done, Wyatt said, voice thick with grief and rage. Look at the destruction you've caused, Bob Jake Duke. How many more have to die to protect your dirty money? Bob Carson seemed to age before Wyatt's eyes. The weight of 15 years of cover-ups finally etched across his features. I never wanted any of this, Bob admitted. It started small, overlooking minor infractions for community donations. Then it grew beyond my control. You could have stopped it, Wyatt accused, still pressing futilely against Duke's wound. Any point you could have chosen to do the right thing. The right thing, Bob laughed bitterly. Do you know what that would have cost? Careers destroyed, families ruined, trust in law enforcement shattered. I chose the lesser evil. Duke's eyes grew glassy but remained fixed on Wyatt, showing the absolute trust that had defined their relationship. Even now, dying from a bullet meant for his master, he showed no regret. You chose convenience over conscience, Wyatt whispered, holding the dog's fading life close. You chose money over morality, and now you're adding murder to your list of sins. Outside, the rumble of approaching vehicles signaled more help on the way. Ellie Raleigh's screams had carried far enough to alert other residents, and Wyatt McAllister could hear the distinct wail of sirens growing closer. Bob Carson heard them too, his face hardening with resolve. This ends here, Wyatt. One way or another, it ends here. The chief raised his weapon again, aiming it directly at Wyatt's head. Stand up. Move away from the dog. Wyatt looked down at Duke, seeing the life fading from the intelligent amber eyes that had anchored him through years of grief and isolation. The German Shepherd had given him everything: companionship, purpose, unconditional love, and now his life. Wyatt couldn't abandon him in these final moments. No, Wyatt said simply. If you're going to kill me, you'll have to do it while I'm holding him. Don't be stupid, Wyatt. Don't make this harder than it has to be. You already made it as hard as possible when you murdered Jake Raleigh, Wyatt replied. When you chose corruption over justice. When you shot the most innocent soul in this room. Duke's breathing grew shallow, each exhale weaker than the last. Wyatt could feel the dog's heartbeat slowing beneath his hands, the strong rhythm that had comforted him through countless sleepless nights now faltering. Good boy, Duke Wyatt, whispered, voice breaking. Such a good boy. Ava would be so proud of you. Bob Carson's resolve wavered as he watched the dying dog and the grief-stricken man holding him. Even a corrupt cop retained a trace of decency, a recognition of the bond between man and loyal companion. The sound of vehicles pulling up outside grew louder, accompanied by slamming car doors and shouted commands. Help was coming, but Wyatt knew it might be too late for Duke. The German Shepherd's eyes were losing focus, his breathing irregular. I'm sorry, Bob Carson said suddenly, and for a moment his voice carried genuine regret. I'm sorry about Duke. I'm sorry about all of it." Wyatt looked up at the man who had been his mentor, his chief, someone he had respected and trusted for decades. Bob had fallen far from the idealistic young sergeant who had taught him about police work, about serving the community with honor and integrity. "You can still do the right thing," Wyatt said. "Put down the gun. Confess to what you've done. Let Jake's family have closure." Bob Carson's hand shook slightly as he maintained aim. "Too late for that. Too many people involved, too many lives at stake. If this comes out, it destroys everything." Duke's tail gave one final, barely perceptible wag, a silent testament of love transcending pain. The dog's amber eyes found Wyatt's face one last time, holding trust, loyalty, forgiveness, and a love that asked for nothing in return. Duke Wyatt whispered as the light faded from those eyes. "My good boy." The German Shepherd. Ava's final gift, who had pulled Wyatt back from despair, who had given him purpose, companionship, and unconditional love, was gone. Silence filled the cabin, broken only by the approaching sirens and Bob Carson's labored breathing. Wyatt gently closed Duke's eyes, hands shaking with grief and rage. When he looked up at Bob, the chief saw something that made him step back. The broken, grieving retiree was gone, replaced by the dangerous man Wyatt McAllister had been for 30 years, the investigator who never let a case go cold, who never let a killer walk free. "Now it's personal," Wyatt said, voice cold enough to make Bob Carson's blood run cold. "You killed my family." Footsteps on the cabin's porch announced backup. Bob couldn't control. The conspiracy that had protected Jake Raleigh's killers for 15 years was about to be exposed. Duke's sacrifice had bought the time needed for help to arrive, ensuring that truth could finally emerge. The German Shepherd's final act of loyalty would unlock justice for Jake Raleigh and redemption for a community poisoned by corruption. The cabin door burst open as Maria Kane and two Montana State Police officers, Levi Hart and Hank Dobbs, rushed inside, weapons drawn. They froze at the scene. Wyatt cradling Duke's lifeless body, Bob Carson with his smoking gun, Carol Pike wounded but conscious on the floor, and Tom Boone motionless near the overturned table. "Drop your weapons." Maria Kane commanded, pistol trained on Bob Carson. Everyone on the ground now. Bob slowly lowered his gun, the fight seeming to drain from him as he realized his carefully built world was collapsing. "It's over," he said quietly, almost to himself. 20 years of scheming, and it was all over. Maria Kane kept her weapon steady as one of the state troopers secured Bob's gun. She had been first to respond to Ellie Raleigh's frantic 911 call about gunfire at Wyatt McAllister's cabin, and had respected the veteran detective's integrity from the start. "Wyatt." "Are you hurt?" Maria Kane asked, noting the blood covering his shirt. "It's Duke's blood," Wyatt McAllister replied, voice hollow with grief. "Bob Carson shot him. Duke died protecting me." Ellie Raleigh appeared in the doorway, her face pale with shock. She'd been waiting outside while the officers secured the scene, but seeing Wyatt holding his dead dog brought tears to her eyes. "Oh, Wyatt, I'm so sorry." Bob Carson looked at Ellie with a flicker of shame. "Ellie, Jake was a good man, a good cop. He didn't deserve what happened to him." "What did happen to him?" Ellie demanded, voice stronger than her trembling hands. "Tell me the truth, Bob. After 15 years, I deserve the truth." Wyatt gently laid Duke's body on the floor, hands shaking as he closed the German Shepherd's eyes for the last time. When he looked at Bob Carson, his expression carried the weight of accumulated grief and the cold promise of justice finally served. "Jake discovered you were protecting a drug operation," Wyatt said, voice steady, despite the pain radiating through his chest. When he threatened to expose the corruption, you killed him and hid his body inside that oak tree on my property. Ellie's knees nearly buckled. You killed my husband. You killed Jake Raleigh. Bob. Carson nodded slowly, the admission seeming to age him decades in moments. Jake was going to destroy everything. The operation we protected funded community programs equipment for the department improvements throughout Cedar Falls. He couldn't see the bigger picture. The bigger picture, Ellie's voice rose to near hysteria. You murdered my husband for drug money, and you called it the bigger picture. Maria Kane had been recording the conversation on her body camera, preserving Bob's confession. Bob Carson, you're under arrest for the murder of Detective Jake Raleigh. As Maria read him his rights, Wyatt stood on unsteady legs. Adrenaline was fading, leaving him drained and hollow. Duke's death had torn open old wounds from losing Claire and Ava. The German Shepherd had been his anchor, his family, his reason to keep going. Wyatt, we'll need a full statement, Maria Kane said gently. But first, let's get you checked by the paramedics. I'm fine, Wyatt replied automatically, though his voice betrayed his grief. Duke took the bullet meant for me. He saved my life. Ellie Raleigh moved closer, eyes fixed on the fallen German Shepherd. Jake would have done the same thing. He would have protected you just like Duke did. The parallels struck Wyatt with devastating clarity. Both Jake Raleigh and Duke had died protecting others, sacrificing themselves for the people they loved. Both had shown courage and loyalty rare in the world. Paramedics arrived to treat Carol Pike's wounds and examine Tom Boone, who was unconscious but alive. Wyatt thought about Ava's final words about getting a dog she'd somehow known he'd need Duke's loyalty and love to survive the coming years of grief and isolation. We found Jake's remains in the oak tree. Wyatt told Ellie, pulling Jake's badge from his pocket. Bob Carson and his people had been watching, waiting to see if he'd uncover the truth. Ellie took the badge with trembling hands, tracing the familiar number 247 memorized during 8 years of marriage. He kept it, she whispered. After all these years, Bob had kept Jake's badge. Now handcuffed and seated on Wyatt's couch, Bob Carson looked up with something approaching remorse. I kept all their badges, Jake. Officer Eli Harper, Detective Sam Whitman, he admitted. I told myself it was to honor their service, but really, I couldn't forget what I'd done. The admission revealed the full scope of Bob Carson's crimes. 3 other officers had died over the years, all because they'd threatened to expose the corruption poisoning the Cedar Falls Police Department. Wyatt realized he'd been living and working alongside a serial killer, someone who used his position to eliminate anyone threatening his criminal enterprise. Maria Kane coordinated with the state police and FBI agents now arriving at the scene. The corruption case would require federal intervention, given the extent of local law enforcement involvement. Wyatt's cabin became a processing center, investigators documenting evidence and interviewing witnesses. Mr. McAllister FBI agent Pat Sullivan said, arriving within hours. We've been investigating rumors of corruption for months. Your discovery of Jake Raleigh's remains may be the breakthrough we needed. Wyatt looked down at Duke, still lying where he had placed him on the cabin floor. Duke found him. Duke led me to the tree, warned me of the danger. He died because he wouldn't let them hurt me. Agent Sullivan followed his gaze. Your dog was a hero, Mr. McAllister. His sacrifice exposed a criminal conspiracy that's been operating for 15 years. As the day wore on, the full scope of Bob Carson's operation became clear. Drug money had funded community improvements, but also lined corrupt officials' pockets throughout Cedar Falls. The investigation would ultimately implicate dozens from city council members to business leaders who benefited from the arrangement. Ellie Raleigh sat beside Wyatt McAllister on his front porch as investigators processed the scene inside. Both were emotionally drained, carrying grief that spanned decades, yet relief mixed with sorrow now that the truth was finally revealed. "Jake can finally rest in peace," Ellie said, clutching her husband's badge. "And you can too, knowing you brought his killer to justice." Wyatt looked toward the oak tree, where Duke had made his final discovery. "Duke deserves the credit," he whispered. "He never stopped protecting his family right up until the end." The sun dipped behind the Montana mountains, painting the sky in gold and crimson. For the first time since losing Claire and Ava, Wyatt felt something approaching peace. Justice had been served, truth revealed, and Duke's sacrifice carried a meaning that would endure long after the pain began to heal. The German Shepherd, Ava's final gift, had completed his mission, safeguarding his master and exposing the corruption that had claimed too many innocent lives. 6 months later, Wyatt McAllister stood before 300 people at Cedar Falls Memorial Park. A bronze statue depicted a German Shepherd in a protective stance, eyes alert, body poised, as if guarding something precious. The inscription read, "Duke McAllister, loyalty, courage, truth, a hero who gave everything to protect his family and expose corruption." The Rex Thompson Memorial Canine Training Center, funded entirely by the reward from solving Jake Rawley's murder, would train police dogs paired with officers across Montana, ensuring the bond between humans and canine partners continued Duke's legacy of protection and service. Ellie Rawley stepped forward to speak, voice steady, despite the tears glistening in her eyes. "Duke didn't just save Wyatt that day. He saved our entire community by helping expose the corruption that poisoned our police department for 15 years. My husband, Jake, would have been proud to serve alongside such a courageous partner." Wyatt felt a familiar weight at his leg and looked down to see Buddy, a 10-week-old German Shepherd puppy with amber eyes remarkably similar to Duke's. The little dog's gaze already held intelligence and protective instincts. Buddy wasn't a replacement. No dog could ever fill that void, but he represented hope, continuity, and the possibility of healing. Bob Carson and his co-conspirators had received long federal prison sentences. The corruption investigation ultimately implicated 17 people, including city officials, business leaders, and law enforcement personnel. The drug operation they protected was dismantled assets, seized, and redirected to fund legitimate community programs. More importantly, the investigation uncovered 3 other victims besides Jake Rawley. Officers Eli Harper, Sam Whitman, and Detective Sarah Lane had all been murdered over the years for threatening to expose Bob Carson's criminal enterprise. Their families finally had closure. Their names were cleared of any suggestion of cowardice or abandonment. Wyatt was asked to consult on similar cold cases throughout the region. His experience uncovering Jake Rawley's murder, combined with decades of investigative expertise, made him invaluable to law enforcement dealing with corruption cases. The work gave him purpose and kept Duke's memory alive through continued service to justice. The bond between a human and their dog teaches us about unconditional love, Wyatt said, addressing the crowd. Duke never asked what was in it for him. He never calculated the cost of loyalty. He simply loved completely and protected fearlessly until his last breath. Buddy barked once, as if understanding the significance of the moment. The crowd chuckled gently, recognizing the puppy's attempt to honor his predecessor. Pat Sullivan approached Wyatt after the ceremony. "We've had requests from 3 other states asking for your assistance with cold cases involving police corruption. The Rex Thompson Foundation could become a national resource for exposing institutional wrongdoing." Wyatt considered the offer while watching Buddy explore the memorial park with boundless energy. The puppy's curiosity and courage reminded him of Duke's early days, every person a potential friend, every moment an adventure to protect. When everything is an adventure to investigate, and every person is a friend to protect some crossings, change you forever, Wyatt said. You can't go back to who you were before, but sometimes that's exactly where you need to be. The ceremony concluded with the release of 17 white doves, one for each year Jake Raleigh's family had waited for answers. As the birds rose into the Montana sky, Wyatt felt a sense of completion that had eluded him since losing Claire and Ava. Duke's sacrifice had given meaning to their losses, transforming grief into purpose. That evening, Wyatt sat on his rebuilt cabin porch, Buddy sprawled across his feet. The oak tree where Jake's body had been discovered was now marked with a simple plaque in memory of Detective Jake Raleigh and all who seek truth in darkness. The tree had healed from investigative cuts, new bark covering the wounds, but the memorial ensured Jake's story would never be forgotten. Ellie Raleigh had become a regular visitor, often bringing her grandchildren to play with Buddy, while she and Wyatt shared memories of their lost loved ones. The friendship forged in trauma has evolved into something sustaining and healing for both of us, Ellie said, during one visit watching Buddy herd her grandson around the yard. Duke would be proud. He'd see that his sacrifice mattered, that it led to justice and healing. Wyatt McAllister felt Duke's presence in Buddy's protective instincts and unwavering loyalty. The young German Shepherd had already shown remarkable intelligence and courage traits that promised he would carry on Duke's legacy of service and devotion. The investigation had revealed that Duke's exceptional ability to detect Jake Raleigh's remains wasn't supernatural, it was biological. German Shepherds possessed extraordinary scenting abilities, and Duke had likely detected chemical changes in the soil around the oak caused by decomposition. His training as Wyatt's companion had honed his senses, teaching him to alert his master to anything unusual, making him the perfect partner for uncovering long-buried secrets. As winter approached, Wyatt reflected on the transformations the past year had brought. He had emerged from isolation to become an advocate for justice. His cabin had evolved from a refuge of grief into a center for healing and purpose. Most importantly, he had learned that love didn't die with loss. It continued through the lives touched and the legacies left behind. Buddy raised his head, ears pricked toward the forest, displaying the same alertness that had characterized Duke's vigilance. Wyatt smiled, recognizing the genetic programming that made German Shepherds such extraordinary guardians and companions. "What do you hear, boy?" Wyatt asked. Buddy relaxed, apparently satisfied that whatever he detected posed no threat to his new family. The evening star appeared in the darkening sky, and Wyatt remembered Ava's belief that those who died became stars watching over their loved ones. He liked to imagine Duke had joined Claire and Ava in that celestial protection, their combined love forming a constellation, guarding his remaining years. Letters continued arriving from families of missing persons across the country, hopeful that Duke's story might spark breakthroughs in their own cases. The Rex Thompson Foundation was processing dozens of requests, building a network of investigators dedicated to finding truth in the coldest cases. Wyatt understood that his grief for Duke would never fully disappear, just as his love for Claire and Ava remained constant despite their absence. Yet the pain had transformed into purpose, the loss into legacy, the ending into a new beginning, defined by service to others facing similar darkness. Buddy shifted against Wyatt's feet, settling into the comfortable weight that signaled a dog's complete trust. The gesture reminded Wyatt of Duke during the hardest nights of grief, when the German Shepherd's warmth had been the only thing preventing total despair. The cycle continued. Love given freely, loyalty, rewarded with protection, sacrifice transformed into meaning. Duke's story would inspire other partnerships between humans and dogs, other investigations into justice, delayed other victories of truth over corruption. As the Montana stars emerged in their ancient patterns, Wyatt felt peace settle over his healing heart. Duke's mission was complete, but his legacy would continue through every case solved. Every family reunited with truth, every bond forged between human and dog in service of something greater. This story reminds us that even in later years we can still make a difference. At 58, Wyatt McAllister had lost everything that mattered: his wife, his daughter, his purpose. Yet through Duke's unwavering loyalty and courage, he found the strength to seek justice and rebuild a life of meaning. This tale speaks to anyone who has faced loss, betrayal, or the feeling that their best days are behind them. The truth is, your wisdom and experience are exactly what this world needs. Like Wyatt, you have the power to stand for what's right, to protect the innocent, and to leave a meaningful legacy. Duke's sacrifice teaches that love transcends death. Courage comes in many forms, and sometimes the most important mission begins when we think our story is over. Your next chapter could be your most significant yet. Questions for engagement. Have you ever had a pet whose loyalty and love helped you through your darkest times? What cause or injustice would motivate you to act regardless of age? Share your stories of loyalty, courage, and second chances in your own path to purpose.